Right, so now that we've got into the T1, first things first, because it's got a live power board over on the side there, make sure it's not plugged in. Seems a stupid thing to say, but so many people leave them plugged in. The first job on the T1 is to replace the buttons that are failing. So the buttons that are failing are contained on this board and this board here that goes around the display. Now, in order to get those out, it's fairly simple. There's 6 screws on this board here. There's a lock screw which contains the cables, and then there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. It's about 9 screws and whatever that is. They're 2 lugs on the second board. So we've got to take both these boards off to be able to get to the buttons on the underside of them. Now, the boards themselves are connected to the main master motherboard by this ribbon cable, which means that we're going to have to lift the motherboard off to be able to get to that. Now, if you saw the how do you get into the Korg T1, you will know that there are some screws holding the motherboard here, 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 and here to the back plate. So we'll need to take those off from the other side. I might also need to take this memory expansion card off, which is to one side, but we'll see where we go with that. So the first thing I think is to disconnect this ribbon cable to allow us to get into the to allow us to get this ribbon cable free, and then we can get into taking these off. Okay, so the first job is to take the 4 screws off. There you go, there are the 3 screws that surround the memory card slots, and that's the 4th screw that was up here at the end of the board. So I'm one of these sticklers who likes to keep the screws in their relative positions, so I'm just going to take these off and store them somewhere in those positions so that I've got some reference point when we put the keyboard back together. Right, so as you can see, 1, 2, 3, 4 screws are no longer connected to the backboard, which means that that board is now free. So now we have 1, 2 screws on the front of this board, and that board should then come up and we should be able to get access to that ribbon cable. Yeah, as I thought, I'm going to have to take the 4 screws off the memory module at the end. So these 4 screws here will have to come off as well. Looks like I need another screwdriver. Okay, always good to have a range of screwdrivers when you're doing this sort of work. Off the way. Okay, so the 4th one's going to be a bit difficult. Let's see if we can get movement without having to do that. Okay. Okay, so the ribbon cable just pulls out like so from the memory board. That frees us up to now go and tackle the top boards. So as I said, I think the top boards are going to be relatively easy to get out. 6 screws. So we'll take the first one out. So there's the first 2 done. While I'm doing the rest, I'll put this on pause. So here, what I'm not doing, I'm not undoing these screws completely because of these little thin wires that are sitting underneath this. What I don't want is for this board to fall off and drag these wires with it. So in order to make sure they don't, what I'm doing here is just leaving these attached until I'm ready to remove the whole assembly. The other thing I've had to remove at this point is I've had to remove the display, because obviously this needs to come off over this. So I needed to remove the display, and I'm also going to have to remove the earthing tag, which is down here. So I'm just going to put that screw back in its hole and just tag it down a bit, like so. That's the earthing tag removed. So I should be able to pull these through. So thinking I can get away without actually having to remove the display, I'm going to have to remove the display as well. So as you can see, it looks like somebody has had this off before, because there should be 4 screws on this display, 2 in either corner. I've taken one off and the display has now come out. There you go, there's the display. Just going to put that to one side for now. That's another project. Okay, so now I'm going to remove the final 2 screws here. Just like that, and off the first bar comes, and a bit of luck just by undoing these little tags here. There's 4 tags at the top, 4 tags at the bottom. Don't know whether that's easy to see on the video, but off that comes like that. Oh my god. There we have the button board. Now I can understand why. So let me just zoom the camera in. I'm not sure this comes out on the camera, but somebody has tried to bastardize these switches here by putting what looks like epoxy resin over the top of them. They've obviously taken a bit of battering in their lifetime. Not sure how we're going to deal with that, but we'll see. Okay, so that's the disassemble done. What I'm now going to do is I'm now going to move over onto my mini workbench and start working over there. Right, so I'm now to my setup workbench, which is my table. And the first thing to look at is I'm looking at the board here. I've got both sets here, and I'm not quite sure whether this is going to come across on camera. But you can just see there how the buttons are put into the board. So basically there are feet on the sides but nothing on the top or the bottom. Okay, so I then look at the replacement buttons. You can see how the feet are on the sides, so that means that these buttons will only go on one way, which is good, which is it's either that way or that way. Either way looks like it is a standard fit, because having looked at the buttons themselves, there are no instructions on them. Surprise, surprise. So now we get to the serious stuff, the soldering and desoldering. I'm not sure how this is going to come across, so but this is how I set up my station. I have a soldering iron which has a heat controller on it, so it's more than a run-of-the-mill soldering iron. I've got this into a pressure vise with, so I can grip the circuit board. These are big rubber vice jaws, so they don't actually damage the circuit board while they're being held. And because of this here, what I've decided to do is just put the box there, just to sort of so I don't strain any of the wires, because I can't detach this. I've had a good look and it doesn't want to come to pieces very easily. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start and I'm going to desolder all the switches along the top first, and then I'll go and do the same on the switches on the next row, and then I'll do the switches around here and over here, and I'll desolder everything before I actually decide to start to solder anything back together. So hopefully, if everything is good to go, good old solder sucker. Soldering iron is saying it's at temperature. Just like that. These have obviously been on here since day dot. There you go, first switch out. Now I've got to repeat that all the way along the top. Obviously I'm not going to leave the video running while I do that. So I've now desoldered the first top row. As you can see, there are now holes where the solder would have been. And here is a collection of switches that have been taken off the board. There you go, there's one de-switched. So now I'll get on and desolder the rest of them. Okay, so there you go, everything's been desoldered on this board. It's all been cleaned up, it's now ready to receive new switches. So in order to put the switches back in, we do it in reverse order. I'm just going to do it in batches. Switches now, the stems are now being put in. It's now just a case of applying the solder. Just like that. Now carry on and do the rest of these. So there we go. So that's circuit board number 1. Brand new switches installed. ready to install in circuit board number 2. So there we go. So that's circuit board number 1. Brand new switches installed. Ready to install in circuit board number 2. So for circuit board number 2, I'm going to replace all these ones because these ones are broken. And that should be it. So of course the astute will now notice that the camera angle has changed. The reason why the camera angle has changed is because I ran out of these. So I've gone and bought some more, which took a few days. So I'm continuing with this a few days later. Now, a couple of things. So I've now got the second board mounted in here, and this is now supported on this box here, so I'm not straining these cables in between. What you need to be very careful of here is you can see that there are a whole load of tracks that run through this area here. Now I don't want to crack those. And unfortunately my clamp only clamps in one place, which is here. So I need to be very, very gentle when I'm dealing with the or unsoldering the switches along this top piece here. So there is a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. There's 8 to be done there, another 2 there, another 2 there, that's 12, another 2 there. So there's 14 on this particular board that need to be replaced, which is considerably less actually than the number of switches that were on the other board that I have just dealt with. So hopefully one more session and we shall be good to go. So I shall start by desoldering from left to right because it's probably easier that way. So I've got my solder sucker again. I've got my very hot soldering iron because you want to be very gentle with this stuff. So you just want to put enough heat in to make the solder melt. Now, why is that not? It's only hot enough. So, oh, here we go. Anyway, I'm not going to bore you doing this. I'll sign on in a few minutes. Okay, so I thought while I was doing this, and I'm not sure how much of this you can see, but so as soon as I'm at this end of the board, and it's easier to see this. The removing one of these switches is a case of heating up the solder like so, using the solder sucker, which is effectively creates an air vacuum over the solder that sucks the solder off the board, and you don't have to apply any pressure to the joint itself, because if your soldering iron is hot enough, the solder will just naturally melt. Now where you might have an issue, and this is what I found with these particular switches, which is why I'm making this little piece here, is that the switches themselves don't naturally disconnect themselves. As in, you don't get all the solder the first time round. So quite often what you have to do is do this a couple of times, just being very careful with the board itself. And then what you need to do is just a little bit of gentle persuasion. I know it looks like I'm probably giving a lot of persuasion, but I really am not, until the switch itself comes out. There, there's the switch. Now the other thing I'm doing at this point is just making sure that the contacts on the switch are properly tinned. And what I mean by properly tinned is when the solder comes out, it leaves a residue. Now what I'm trying to do here is make sure that the copper contacts on here are properly tinned, which just means just rubbing the soldering iron over them to just make sure any excess solder just amalgamates. The other thing this does is it makes sure that the hole that the new switch is going to, or the new leg of the new switch is going to come through, is properly clear. And again, I'm not sure you can really see this on the video, but I'm just sort of making the point here. So I've got another 3 of these to go, and then we'll start soldering the new switches in. So here we are, we've got circuit board 2 completely now switch desoldered. So there are all the old switches in my hand here. Now some of these switches did still work, but I thought seeing as I was replacing the switches that didn't work, I'd just do all the switches together. So there you go. So they're all dead, they're going in the bin. And now we start with new switches. Now, one of the things I did do before I started this exercise, and I'm opening new switches, here you go, is to check which way around the switches go, how the polarity works on the switch. Now these switches are fairly universal. So there is a new switch, looks like an old switch. And the way they go on the board is effectively like that. The polarity is between these bottom 2 pins and the top 2 pins. So, i.e. a contact like so, which you can't hear, do that like that, will actually create a connection between these top 2 pins on both sides and the bottom 2 pins on both sides. So these go onto the board like that, with the actual pin connections effectively on the left and the right, not the top and the bottom. So it's that way around, not that way around, as in that way around, not that way around. So now we'll start soldering the new ones on. So I'm going to do these in batches of 2, and you'll forgive me, but I'm going to have to get into the camera so I can see. How these go onto the board. 2 and 1, 2. So there you go, they just push through just like that. If you've got them right, they should just fit into the holes that have been left by the switches I've removed, which they have been. So the next thing on this, now I'm not the world's most expert solderer, so you will appear, just bear with me. The other thing I like to do is that it just makes it flow better, is I sort of just wet the end of the solder. I don't know why, I've always done it like that, but if you've got the soldering iron hot enough, then actually fixing these switches in is a very, very quick process. And the other secret to this is you actually apply the heat to the item and you apply the solder to the item as well. You don't apply the solder to the soldering iron, which is a lot of people used to do. So hopefully that's good. That's one group done. Actually, that's a bit. Yeah, they look like they're all good. Let's try the next ones. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. They all look good. Okay. So as I said, one of the secrets here is a very hot soldering iron, or a good hot soldering iron. You can normally find, again, this is just a sort of one of mine. They used to have written on these things, but they don't seem to have it written on here, what the melting point is of your solder. It's a good so if you've got solder that melts at a fairly low temperature, you can turn the temperature of the soldering iron down. I believe this solder melts at about 350 degrees, so I've got a soldering iron set at 400. Just makes it very quick. So I'm going to continue and solder the rest of these switches on the board. So there we have all the new switches all soldered into place on both boards. These are now ready to go back into the T1. Which I'll do very carefully in a moment. Okay, the next job to be done just before we start to bolt the contact panel back is to fix any broken switches. Now, I know there's a broken switch here, so these just peel off. They're only affixed with double-sided sticky tape effectively. So there you can see the broken switch. These are in blocks of 4, but the ones I'm going to replace it with are in blocks of 2. So I need 2 of those. So here goes. So there's one. Back in like so. And there's the next one. It goes in like so as well. Now I'm just checking, there's another broken one there. So a block of 4 needs to come off. Actually, might just be able to get away with taking 2 of those off like so, because it's broken already. So again, you can see the brokenness of it. Oops. So again, I'm going to replace that with just a 2 like so. These just need to be held in place. There's another one there. See, that one's broken as well. These 2 can come off like so. And again, there's the broken switch. And we just replace it like so. That is all the switches replaced. These ones can all be thrown away. So the final job in replacing this piece is to put the switchboards back in place. And the way to do this is there are some locator lugs on this side, which we just need to get the board onto. Another one there. Making a complete hash of this, aren't I? Right. No, it's not. Not happy about something. What's it not happy about? There you go. So that's the first one on. Over all the locator lugs, like so. Ready for screws. And then we put the second one in place. Now the second one we have to line up the screws like so, and then what we're going to do here is just put a couple of screws in just to hold it in place temporarily while I adjust the fit. Right, I'm going to carry on screwing this together and I'll switch the video back on. Okay, so I have screwed everything back, and the final test is to press all the buttons and make sure you can hear a clear contact. Now, I'm going to have to put the microphone quite in close so you can hear this. Right. Unfortunately, you probably saw a lot of my backside in that one, but effectively what I was doing there was depressing the switch and making sure I could hear the micro switch click to ensure it's making proper contact from the top to the bottom. Now all of those switches appear to be making proper contact, which is good, because that means that all the position, so if I go and, where's the switch? Hang on a sec, let me grab a switch. So effectively what I was trying to do there was make sure that this piece at the top here hit, which is a little bit out of focus. Let me just focus up on that. But this piece that's on top is making good contact with the micro switch that sits underneath it. It does that effectively. So that was what I was checking for there. Everything seems to be in contact and making a clicking sound, which is all good, which means that hopefully all those switches are now good to go. But we'll only find that out when we put the T1 back together in its entirety. So here we go, the moment of truth. So I've temporarily fixed the motherboard back in position. I haven't completely fixed it back in position now, but it is temporarily fixed in position. This is all fixed in position now. So what I'm going to do now is close the lid down like so. Now as you can see, let me just adjust the camera angle so it is looking at the top of the keyboard. You can now see that all the buttons are in place, which is good. That one's there. So hopefully he says this is all going to work. Just need to put the value slider back on its, oops, wrong way around. Doesn't make any difference. I'll just take that off again. I'll do that in a minute. So now what we need to do is we need to find the power cord, which is down here behind the keyboard somewhere. Bear with me while I just go and ferret around underneath the keyboard. Okay, let's plug that in like so, like that, and then let's switch it on. Ah. Oh, well, that's easily rectified, says I. Right. So, we have all these come up. Let's see if I can... Oh, look at that. All those work. That works. As does that. Good stuff. So, all the buttons on this part of the panel are now working. Let's try the other side of the panel, shall we? That's working. As is that. As is that. As is that. That one. Program B. Program A. Combi. 0 or 1. 0. They're all working. As are they. Well, I think we can say that that repair seems to have worked well. Good stuff. We can move on to the next one. I've been told it helps the channel out greatly if you hit the like button if you enjoyed the contents of this video. If you want to be notified about future videos that may be made for the channel, please hit the subscribe button.